Douglas, as I've listened to you, many questions have come to mind, and one of them, perhaps the neophyte's question, is what's to say when I point here that I'm not just pointing at an electrochemical mess that holds my consciousness that's completely surrounded by my skull, and that's its limit.
Well, nothing to prevent you imagining all that stuff, is there? I mean, it's a free country. You can imagine what you like. The question was, Robert, what do you see there? I kept on saying, on present evidence, what do you see? And if you remember, I quoted, not that this was for believing or anything, but for trying out. I quoted the Zen master Wang Po, who said, the ordinary man goes by what he thinks, and the wise man goes by what he sees. And what we were up to, at least what I was up to and continue to be up to, is having a go to see whether what we see isn't a good enough world for living in before we completely reverse everything and muck it up. And reverse very often the messages that are coming to us from the given world, the conceptual world, the thought-up world, an instance of which you have kindly just donated. Well, I mean, that's what we do. And that my whole endeavor, Robert, is to say, I don't mind what you think up and cogitate and so on, but that's not what we're on about now. What we're on about now is having a go at looking at what's given. And the rubric here and the rule is on present evidence, what do I see? And also where comes in, you see. I mean, where do you see? I don't know if anybody ever did see what you described, but I don't think they saw it in the place you were pointing at. I think they saw it in the laboratory somewhere. I say, what did you see there? What do you see there now? When you point, would you perhaps have another go and tell me? On present evidence.
Well, on present evidence, I see nothing.
Well, that's right. Congratulations. You see nothing in that direction, but I think the nothing is filled with the seeing in this direction, isn't it? And you see, Robert, I take this seriously for several reasons. One is that as I go up to you, progressively from here, I lose Robert and I come to little bits of Robert, like a nose or an eye. As I approach and get nearer and nearer, I come to wise cells and molecules and atoms and all that stuff. And at the point of contact, which is right where you are, what you're looking out of now, of course I'm looking at in that direction and you're looking out of it, so I'm getting a different view of it. But I lose you absolutely there, and I find at that place, when I go right up to it, I find nothing, which is exactly what you find. And brain, you mentioned a brain in the skull. Well, I find a brain in the skull and so on the way there. But I left the brain and the skull out here, you see. And I lost the brain and the skull as I moved further in. And if you had now a window in your forehead here, I would see your brain there. And in the future, instead of having a scalp and hair, you might have a plastic case. I mean, it could well happen. And instead of then having a hairdo, you would have a brain do. Well, you go up then as I went up to you, I should find Robert's brain do almost precisely where I found his face. And then I'd move in and leave that behind. So, of course you've got a brain, of course you've got all that stuff. But I lose it on the way up to you. It's not a case of whether you have a brain and whether it's functioning, whether it's any use and so forth. It's a case of where you keep it. And at each stage of the journey, we have to have the simplicity and the directness and honesty just to report on what is given at that point without contaminating it with memory of other stations which we have passed, or the anticipation of other stations we're coming to. So it's just a case of telling it as it is. Doesn't that make sense?
Yes, it does. Well, it is comforting to know that looking at nothing is actually the right answer.
Well, yes, and the interesting thing is, don't you think, that the nothing is visible. I mean, you don't smell it, do you? You don't smell it, and you don't taste it, you don't think it. You can actually see it. And you can see an absence. You see, when I look here, I see an absence. You say, oh, Douglas, you can't see an absence. I can, you know. Look, on this table, if you look on this table, you see the glasses there now, on the table, some glasses. Now, keep looking at that spot. Look, see the absence of the glasses. You don't smell the absence of the glasses. You see the absence of glasses. And look, supposing I would say, look there, you can see the absence of a giraffe there, can't you?
Indeed, yes.
A crocodile there. You name it, you can see its absence with great clarity. You don't understand it, you don't smell it, you don't think it. You can see an absence. In fact, it's easier to see an absence than to see a presence, because presences, you see, are very complicated. And you have to scan them and read them and perhaps name them and all that. But see an absence, very simple. So I say, when I look here, I see the absence or the nothingness with a special degree of clarity, which really I find terribly interesting, because one of the medieval definitions of God, who is alleged to be nearer to me than I am to myself, and even nearer to Robert than Robert is to Robert, that only God is perfectly visible, because only God is perfectly simple. So God, who is not a no thing, but not a nothing, but the no thing, aware of itself as no thing, is utterly visible here. And Ramakrishna says, I see God more clearly than I see you. And Angela Foligno says, she sees God more clearly as she sees a man. And this is so visible. But it's visible as no thing. And what you described there was importing into the situation, I mean, a whole bag of tricks, which was imagined, wasn't it?
Yes, indeed. Yes.
And you see, the whole basis of science is that you keep referring back all your wonderful structures and your speculations and so forth, all being referred back. If you want your science to be well-founded and to progress, you're always having recourse to the data, and you are humble before what is given. And humility in front of the given means you don't muck about with it and impose on it a lot of stuff which is not given on that occasion.
Well, that's really cleared it up, that question very nicely.
I hope it has really.
Yes, it really has. Another question that I find quite important is that many of us have problems that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, money problems.
Many of us?
All of us.
Could you mention someone who hasn't? I mean, an adult person.
Mm-hmm.
All of us.
How does this help us in solving those problems, dealing with those problems?
Could you give me a specific problem? Let's not be vague.
Well, it's somebody who might be very worried about money right now. They're going broke. So, how will this help them?
Well, you see, is that quite relevant? I mean, it's about who we really, really are. And it's not a question of how healthy your bank balance is and how it might be improved. It's another field, isn't it? I mean, you don't say, how does the theory of Freud's theory of the unconscious help me to earn more money? Or Darwin's doctrine of evolution, how did it help me to be happy this evening? I mean, you have to take things for what they purport to be. I'm not purveying something that solves all these problems. Directly, what I'm saying is, asking is, who are you in your own experience at this time, right at the center? Now, I would say this, though, that if we start living from truth, Robert, which is that we are no thing, which is imperishable, which is boundless, which is awake, and so forth, and it doesn't move, and so forth. If we're that, and we're living from a truth, I think we're going to manage everything better, because living from a pack of lies and hallucinating something here is to be kind of crazy at the center of my world. And if we tell the truth about who we are, we've got a better instrument for living. Now, look, if I'm going to make a table, say I'm going to make this table, and I'm using a saw and a chisel and several other tools, I better know what tools I'm using in order to make a good table and not do myself a mischief. Well, this is my tool for living. And I say, let me get to know my tool for living, which is this, whatever it might be. And then see if it doesn't perhaps make some difference in my bank balance. And there's another thing, Robert, about bank balances. You mentioned it. See, how much, just consider, it's a rather personal question. May I be personal, you see? Well, Robert, could you consider how much of your expenditure is on the necessities like having enough in your tummy and having a roof over your head and so forth, and how much is to keep up a standard of living appropriate to your status and your job and your, your neighbors, and keeping up with the Joneses and a few million other things. I think we should find that perhaps half, even 3/4 of our expenditure was really because we were in competition with people who were living at a certain standard, and we just couldn't afford to. We thought we couldn't afford to slip behind. And also the little Roberts, the little Roberts growing up there, and if they don't have the toys which the neighbor has, they feel put down and they come and complain to daddy, don't they? Indeed. So indeed we're in this game of accumulating all sorts of things which really perhaps are not terribly good for us or the child or anyone. And then I think when we see who we really, really, really are, it's so splendid, it's so tremendous. I mean, who you really, really are is not a product of the world, it's the origin of the world. And Robert is out there as an expression of that, and very important too. But who you are is splendid, awesome beyond belief. Now, it really, keeping up with the Joneses is not necessary. God doesn't have to keep up with any Joneses, I tell you. So, and this helps your bank balance, you see. Really, I'm sure it does.
Oh, yes, it does.
It really does. And of course, you see, if you own the world, which indeed you do, as who you really, really are, I mean, you're crowned with the stars and the heavens and the hills and the mountains, the people and the trees, and everything is yours. And then you don't need, 3 separate types of can opener in your kitchen and 50,000 other gadgets around the house, and a machine for chopping off the top of an egg. I mean, I don't know whether you have one in your house, but I found one. And I mean, come on, where does it end? You don't need those things. And another thing, you see, these things which we think are necessary to our standard of life, you see, really we're talked into them. They're artificial needs created by the darn television. And, you know, what a burden when you got them. You feel guilty when you haven't got them because, you know, you're falling behind. And your kids feel that their parents are really, you know, they're not too well off, are they? And all that, you see. But once you've got the darn things, you've got to look after them. And, you know, they go wrong. I think the more you own, the more headaches you acquire. And I don't know. Oh, I have a story about this. A very true story. In the war, I was in the Far East, and the Japanese were moving up Burma, and the British troops in Burma were engaged in a scorched earth policy to deprive the Japanese of resources as they came up. And there was a man there who I didn't know but heard of, who had built a beautiful house in Burma, halfway up, Mandalay region perhaps, and he collected there all sorts of treasures, a beautiful house, and he was required to set a match to it as the Japanese came up. And what a terrible thing, terrible thing. You know, he did it with a marvelous sense of relief, dropping that burden. We think all these things we've got to buy and accumulate round us are doing us good. I think they're, on the whole, I should say about, I don't know, what, 60%, 70% are really unnecessary. So I say, if you're living from who you really are, there are many reasons why your bank balance is going to look a little better. Also, another thing, excuse me for going on, short question, rather long answer. You see, and I'm sure of this, Robert, I don't care what I do, if I'm going to rob a bank even, if I'm going to paint a picture or write a poem or play music or whatever, I'm going to do a better job from who I really am than from a pack of lies. And I don't care what it is, I'm going to do better job when I tell the truth about my true nature here, instead of lying about it. Now that includes one's professional work, as well as one's other activities, you see. And I say, if you want to do a good job, see who's doing the job. And good jobs are a little bit apt to attract more money than rotten jobs. So there are about 5 reasons why you could confidently, no, not with total confidence, you could reasonably expect some improvement in your bank balance. Well, you used you brought up that instance. And in other words, to sum it all up, what we've been on about, this thing we've been on about together, is intensely practical. Would you agree?
Yes. Well, another question that flows from that, one of the things that we talked about is busting oneself wide open for people.
Mm-hmm.
Many people are quite frightened of other people.
Mm.
And there's an element of fear
Mm.
in busting oneself open for the world.
Mm.
What would you say to people who have that fear?
Well, first of all, Robert, I would say you don't bust yourself open. You are busted open. You've no choice. You've no choice. And you may as well tell the truth. I mean, you've nothing to shut it up with. I mean, it's not a case of whether I want to or not. I am busted wide open. And you said rather inaccurately, Robert, that I advise people to bust themselves open. I say, don't do anything of the sort. Don't do it. See that you are busted. In fact, you never were. You always were open, you see. It was always Glasnost, it always was open. So, A, you don't have an option. And secondly, what about dealing with people who are going to give you a hard time? Shouldn't you keep them out? I mean, you don't want to be invaded by every Tom, Dick, and Harry do. You want to keep some people at a distance, and you can't afford to be so open. Well, the thing is, first of all, you don't have any option, and secondly, what's safe? I mean, what if I put here, which is illegitimate and untrue, my Douglasness, I'm exposing that to attack and ridicule and all that stuff. And Douglas is very vulnerable to that, and I can be hurt and taken down a peg or two and taken the mickey out of and all that stuff. Douglas can, because Douglas is very vulnerable and unsafe. He's at risk, you see. He's at risk. Douglas is at risk. Extremely vulnerable. But you see, who we really, really are, this no thing, which we've agreed, Robert, is no thing. Now, no thing can't be injured or hurt, can it? So no thing is safe. So if you've got really an awkward customer there giving you a hard time, the way to deal with that customer, I think, is to present nothing for attack. Present no thing for attack, which is simply being the way you are. And there's a further advantage in this, because you see, if I hallucinate Douglas here to have a go at this chap, and we'll push him away, and we'll resist this invasion, and we'll give this chap a hard time because he's giving us a hard time, you see, well, of course, that's going to exacerbate the situation, and you're going to empower him, encourage him to be even more aggressive. But if I present to him no thing here to be hit or to attack, why, I think, it's going to be difficult for him to keep up his anger. So I say the way to perhaps mollify these aggressive types that you're talking about is to tell the truth and be who you are.
Well,
would you? But I mean,
would agree with that.
You would.
That makes a lot of sense.
I think so. Well, I mean, don't believe it. Don't believe it, Robert. I would say I think this is for testing, isn't it? We don't take it from me or anyone. I think we just have to have a go and see what works. And the frequent question or objection which you've raised, which is so helpful of you to raise it because it's so common. I can't afford to be so open. And my answer is the one I've given. And have a go at being who you are, and see if you don't suffer less from this. You're not hurt in the same way. In a way, you don't care so terribly about what people think of you. I mean, you know who you are, you see who you are, you live the life of who you are. But if people come and attack you and say, I don't like your face, or you're nasty, or Douglas, and so on, which people occasionally do, and I agree with them in a way, well, but I'm not devastated by that. I don't care much, because I've found out who I am. And anyway, I agree with Douglas as a pretty dreadful person in some ways. You can afford to have people knock Robert when you know who you really are. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. So, another question that during the various exercises you've presented, certain things have been observed and happened, pointing to yourself or looking at the two faces. how does one, in one's everyday life, continue to reinforce and remember who one really, really is? And not forget everything after one's seen the videotape or finished a weekend.
That's a big one, isn't it? That's a big one. I don't really know what the answer is, but it's mysterious why some people go on with it. Of course, the obvious thing is you have to keep coming back and coming back. Your question is, how do you remember to come back? And I think this is something I really can't answer, because some people are given such passion, such interest. It's something they find fascinating. They're discovering who they are, living from who they are. It's fun, exciting. They're driven. They have this fire in their belly. The self-fire of self-discovery. You see, I'm going to find out who I am and live from that. And I'm going to have a real go. Now, I mean, you can't say people have got to do that. It's kind of given to you. I would say it's grace, really, which gives you the interest and the passion and the fire in your belly. Well, I suppose you can pray for passion, pray for fire in your belly, but I don't know it will come, really. I think it's God's good grace which gives you this passion for living from who you are, and the urge to have fun, really, because it is extraordinarily interesting. It goes on and on. I mean, all the time, new thing coming up, even at my advanced age and state of advanced decay. All new thing coming up. So I think the answer is what will keep you looking, coming back to this, is because you're fascinated, and you, for some reason, it interests you, it fascinates you, and you have a liking for it. You have a fancy for it. You go for it. And all I can say is it's a pity to go through our life and engaged in trivia, really, isn't it? And not address these fundamental questions. You know, Plato says the unexamined life is not worth living. That's tough, that is. And I do think in the end that's true, you see. And why is it true, Robert? Because when I don't go into this, you say, well, it's optional. Some people want to find out who they are, and some people want, play snooker and make $1 million or something. And it's just a matter of choice, really. But it's not so, really, because who you are is so fundamental. And who you are, I'm absolutely sure of this. When we investigate who we are, we find we are just incredibly more fortunate and blessed than ever we had suspected. And that in this inquiry is not only entertainment, but really getting all our hearts can desire. And more than that. There's such blessing in it. You see, God's world, which is the world of given, not the world we think up, the world of given, on present evidence world, I say that is replete with blessing. For example, one of the blessings is that we are built for loving in that world. We're built open for one another. I'm built open for Robert. Robert's built open for Douglas. That's one of the blessings. So I think we have every reason to keep coming back to who we are. Every time we come back and make the journey home, whether on the vehicle of our spectacles, our toothbrush, our comb, or pointing, or just looking, single eye, however we come home, I say it gets easier every time. But we have to do it. And I repeat, I don't know why some people are driven to do this with great passion, and others say, well, I see this, so what? I don't know. why that should be so. It's a mystery.
Oh, Douglas, thank you very much for answering my question.
Have you got some more?
I don't think so, no.
But are you quite sure? I mean, I don't want to bulldoze you.
No, there are no questions that come to mind right now. So,
But would you say it's worth having a go?
oh, definitely. Definitely.
Your heart and your mind would say that, wouldn't they?
Definitely. Yeah. A lot of different philosophies and religions give us incredibly complex routes home.
Mm.
And it's rather nice to just point there.
Well, you see, the thing which had been advertised down the ages to be the great treasure was very often represented as a treasure extremely hard to discover and to excavate and take away. I mean, it's incredibly hard work to find it and go off with it. And I think that in our time, thank the dear Lord, I think we have some tools for the job, and they make the job so much easier initially, although the work has to be put in to habituate. I think we have to get rid of these bad habits, don't we? And we don't do that overnight. But Robert, we want something to structure our time, don't we? We want adventure. We don't want everything a piece of cake, do we? We don't want everything given us on a plate. What we want is something, a challenge. If we have any life in us and any guts, we want a challenge. And this is a challenge. I see who I am. The challenge is, how do I practice it until I am who I am in all the time? And I say that what greater adventure, what more practical adventure, what adventure which will be so good for my bank balance, I think. And well, I'm not guaranteeing that. I mean, of course, it is possible that if you pursue this, Robert, I mean, it's just possible, but I don't think it's likely that your bank balance might be rather irrelevant because people are trying to barbecue you, you see. In which case your bank balance wouldn't really matter much. And the people who have pursued this sometimes got crucified and barbecued, really did, burned alive for this inquiry. Well, I think we can do it now with less risk of injury. But they valued it so much. And talk about nothingness and simplicity. I'm thinking of John Huss in Bohemian, who had an expression, O sancta simplicitas, O holy simplicity. He said, O holy simplicity. And he was being burned alive when he said it. He valued it that much, you know. So I'm not offering something which is guaranteed pain-free, but true. Truth, Robert, sets us free, not nice feelings, not nice bank balances. The truth. And the truth is so exciting. And it's the exact opposite of what's been advertised. It's the exact opposite. I mean, everything they told me about this is the exact opposite of what I find. To recapitulate, I mean, I was told I was looking out 2 peepholes and 1 great window. I was told I was opaque and I'm transparent. I was told I move around in the world and I get in my car and I see the world does all the moving. I was told I was small and I go on in all directions and so forth. And so, you know, this is a great adventure. We don't know what adventure is until we engage in this pursuit, I think. Anyway, it's a very helpful question. Thank you, Robert, very much.
Thank you, Robert.